Number 1.
First off, I would like to explain that my father is not a believer in the paranormal, and used to scoff at the idea of an afterlife or anything demonic. He's a firm believer in the notion of fearing the living, not the dead. However, the following incident is something that has definitely changed him from Agent Scully to a near inconsolable, terrified child. My parents live in a large house and the property is encased within a 10-foot fence with an electric gate. There's almost no way to get in uninvited without setting off some kind of alarm or being spotted on camera. One night when my dad was home alone and sitting in the living room, he was interrupted by a continuous hard knocking on the front door. He explained to us later that the knock was relentless but not frantic, like a steady heartbeat. Upon approaching the door, he said the knocking stopped, almost when he was within arm's reach of the knob. After opening the door, he found a boy about 14 years old, standing completely motionless on the top step of the front porch facing him, a good 5 or 6 feet from the door. My father described the boy as wearing a nondescript hoodie, green cargo shorts, and a pair of sneakers with gray socks. His hair was perfectly brushed to the side, and his skin was pale. My father was extremely confused by the situation and couldn't find his voice, and before he could speak, the boy said, "I'm lost. Can I come inside?" My father's stomach dropped, and he found himself unable to move. The boy continued, speaking very calmly and clearly, yet in a manner that seemed rehearsed and mechanical. "I am cold and lost. I am frightened." My father noted that despite the sun being down, the temperature was still in the low 80s, and the boy was wearing a hoodie. He said that it was that fact that finally made him snap back into the moment and find his voice. "No. Get off my property," my dad firmly said. "Please, I am only a boy. I am cold." The boy raised his head up to slightly reveal completely white eyes. When my dad made eye contact with him, he said it was as though something inside him withered away and died. He could almost hear the echo of the boy's voice reverberating clearly in his head. The boy's voice seemed to become louder, yet my father didn't even recall the boy's lips moving from this point on.
"Neil, your behavior is abhorrent. Let me in, Neil. You are alone inside."
At the mention of his first name, my father slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. He turned off every light in the house and turned on the alarm system, and spent the night sitting in terror alone in the living room. He said that every so often he could hear the sound of knocking coming from the window across the room, but forced himself not to get up and look behind the curtains. I asked him why he didn't call the police, and he explained that he was too afraid to move, and felt even though the boy thing remained outside, it could have easily gotten in if it wanted to. I've done some research and found out about the black-eyed children, which apparently behave in a very similar way. However, my father swears that the eyes were ice white, and the voice didn't sound old or young. I've come to the conclusion that this entity is of the demonic variety. The cameras don't show anyone entering the property or coming up the driveway to the front door. The camera pointed at the entryway was inside at a slant, and since the boy was standing on the porch step, he was in a perfect blind spot where no camera was on him. It was as though he knew exactly where to stand to avoid detection. My dad has never been on medication, and he's not a liar, so I don't know what to think. This has impacted my dad's behavior at work, and he almost never leaves the house at night anymore. He's lost weight and has installed a new security system, but every night he paces the halls nervously before going to sleep, worried that we might be visited again, and this time, the white-eyed demon won't knock. It will just walk in.
Number 2.
Back in 2012, I took a trip to Ontario, Canada, and was staying over my friend Jay's place for the night. His mother taught archaeology and had several smaller pieces of artifacts and bones in a display case in her study. After showing me around, Jay asked me if I wanted to see another one that she kept in a locked filing cabinet downstairs in the basement. We went down into the basement, and Jay pulled a key from its hiding place by the water heater. He opened the drawer and pulled out a large velvet pouch that was sealed with a drawstring. He paused for a moment to make sure his mom wasn't coming down the stairs, and then opened it, and revealed a blackened human jawbone. At least it looked human. There was a few teeth still attached that appeared to be slightly over large. I told him that I didn't believe it was real, to which he rolled his eyes and asked me why his mom would have it locked away if it was fake. He let me hold it and told me that it was a jawbone of a man who was possessed by a demon and burned himself alive after a failed exorcism. He didn't know exactly what year this supposedly occurred, but he claimed that the couple from the Conjuring movie, Ed and Lorraine Warren, had examined the bone and warned the museum not to keep it on display because it supposedly had an evil aura surrounding it. We examined the bone for a few more minutes, and then he carefully placed it back in its bag and locked the drawer again. Later that night, Jay and I played video games in his bedroom until around 1 in the morning. Eventually, Jay passed out, and I decided to try and get some sleep on the air mattress next to his bed. But I couldn't get comfortable, and for some reason my palms were very itchy, and I couldn't stop rubbing them together. After maybe 20 minutes, I got up, and using my phone as a flashlight, I navigated back downstairs to the basement. I got the key from its hiding place and opened the filing cabinet drawer. For some reason, I felt drawn to the bone. I wanted to look at it again. I pressed my thumb to the point of one of its teeth until a pinprick of blood appeared. I wondered if the story was real, if the demon was aware of me and knew what I was doing. The light from the stairway suddenly came on, and for a split second, I panicked, worried that his mom was coming downstairs, but there was no sound of feet descending. Instead, I froze when I noticed a man leaning against an old desk in the corner facing me, just outside the range of the light in the shadows. I could tell it wasn't Jay's dad. This man was bald, with broad shoulders, and seemed to be wearing what at first I thought was a bathrobe, but as my eyes adjusted to the light, they appeared to be more like the black robes that a Catholic priest would wear. There was suddenly a funny odor in the air, and I quickly moved to hide the jawbone behind my back. My voice shook as I said, "Have you been here the whole time?" The man didn't answer. He didn't even move, except to tap his finger against one of the brass knobs on the desk, with a fingernail that closely resembled a claw. I'm not 100% positive because it wasn't my house, but I don't think there was any way he could have turned on the light to the stairs from where he was leaning. I remembered Jay mentioning that his uncle lived with them a few months out of the year, and I figured that's who this man had to be. "Are you Jay's uncle?" The man didn't respond. I started to get very disturbed and frightened, not wanting to turn my back on the man. I made to drop the jawbone back into the drawer behind me. That's when he finally spoke.
"It's real."
He nodded at me. Aside from being slightly deep, his voice sounded completely normal. I immediately felt better and held up the jawbone. "It is? Are you sure?" The man nodded.
"A very devout man once turned from God and made a deal with the devil to protect the ones he loved."
"Why would someone make a deal with the devil?" I asked, transfixed on the man's outline in the shadows. The man rubbed his chin.
"God makes promises, but Satan provides."
"How did he do it?"
"He provided his blood, and the devil marked his soul as his own."
The man suddenly straightened and walked directly towards me. I backed into the cabinet as the man seemed to glide towards me and plucked the jawbone out of my hand. It may have just been a trick of the light, but when he raised the artifact to his mouth, it seemed as though the canine teeth in his mouth matched the size of the ones on the bone. The taste of smoke and ash suddenly caught in the back of my throat, and as he stared down at me with pale, expressionless eyes, I thought I noticed the outlines of horns protruding from either side of his bald head.
"He marks the souls like this."
He pressed his thumb directly into my chest, and I suddenly felt an intense burning pain from under his touch. There was a ringing in my ears, and I felt a sensation of thundering noise around me. like a man bound to the railroad tracks would feel as the train barrels towards him. I remembered screaming and hearing the filing cabinet slam to the ground behind me. The man pulled his thumb away, and I sprinted up the stairs and back into Jay's room, where I hid under his bed, cowering in fear and throbbing with pain, until I fell asleep what felt like hours later. No one followed me up from the basement, and no one seemed to have been awoken by the noise. The following morning, Jay woke me up by poking at me with a hockey stick. I felt incredibly sick and asked to be taken home. I didn't say anything about the man or the jawbone, and I didn't hear anything from Jay about the cabinet downstairs. I tried to pass this off as a nightmare or sleepwalking, but when I woke up that morning, there was still a cut on my thumb, and a fierce itching sensation on my palms, and a large burn mark on my chest. After a few weeks, when I wasn't feeling any better, my mom took me to the doctor, and I was diagnosed with Gleanard's disease, also known as organ displacement, and I was told that my inner organs were sitting lower than they should have been. It confused my doctor quite a bit, as my previous appointment from 6 months earlier showed no signs of this condition. He said it was almost as if something with extreme force had reached within me and tried to crush them. I haven't been over Jay's house since, and he eventually told me that his mom got rid of the jawbone. But before that, he told me something even more terrifying. He said his Uncle Kyle had been working on a cruise ship for the past several months, so whoever I saw wasn't someone who was supposed to be there.
Number 3.
During the summer of 2011, a few friends and I decided to go check out the supposed legend of the woods behind our town's public baseball diamond. Some people claim those woods were the entrance to hell. It was true that 2 girls were raped and killed back there during the 80s, but I wasn't sure I believed the rest of the stories, including hearing screams from the dead of night, reports of cloven tracks being found in the dirt, and snow always melting immediately upon the earth among the trees. Creepily enough, on the far side of the woods was a cemetery. At around midnight, 8 or 9 of us exited our cars and walked across the field towards the woods. We walked between the stands, what had been dubbed the gates of hell, and we entered the trees. Most of us stopped a few dozen feet into the woods, but my friends Malik and Peyton kept walking and disappeared deeper into the shadows. The rest of us just lingered there, talking way too loud and laughing way too frequently to try to mask the fact that we were all creeped out. Suddenly we all went silent as we heard what sounded like small children laughing only a few yards away. Not laughing like they were having fun on the playground, more like giggling, like they were being sneaky and spying on us. My friend Damien suddenly screamed, "Whoa, watch out!" and sprinted back out of the woods. Not even 30 seconds later, Malik and Peyton also came running out of the trees. The rest of us turned and followed them back out. Once we were all safely back on the field, Damien said that he had seen a figure emerge from behind a tree and head straight towards him. Peyton said that he and Malik had heard footsteps coming towards them and saw 2 glowing red eyes. All 3 of them were shaken badly and wanted to leave. I kind of smirked, half convinced they had just been imagining everything. But another part of me was legitimately spooked and wasn't about to walk into those woods. The madness didn't stop there, unfortunately. On our way home, Peyton started to complain about his back burning. I lifted his shirt and saw scratches all over his lower back, deep enough to draw blood. Everyone in the car started freaking out. Then Damien, who was driving, started gagging like he was throwing up. He pulled the car over and stumbled out of the car and collapsed on the grass. Peyton, Sarah, Jake, and I all got out as well and walked over to him. But the second car with the rest of my friends kept driving. Damien vomited a thick paste-like substance and then started cursing violently and shaking, yelling at all of us in a tone of voice that wasn't his own. I honestly don't remember most of what he said, but he was spewing profanity so fast that it made me want to get back in the car and lock myself in. Damien leapt up and physically tried to attack Sarah, but Jake and Peyton held him back. Jake punched him hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him, and he collapsed onto the grass. That's when Sarah started screaming. Back down the road in the direction we had just come from, the streetlights began to flicker, and we saw a single lone figure walking down in the middle of the street. The thing didn't seem to be moving its legs. It seemed to be gliding, like it was floating towards us. Sarah and I screamed and jumped back in the car. I got behind the wheel and put the car into drive. Jake and Peyton grabbed Damien and threw him in the back. The doors weren't even closed when I floored it and took off down the road, blowing right past a stop sign. I had seen the figure coming closer in the rearview mirror and had nearly lost my shit when I saw its glowing red eyes. We drove straight to the emergency room, left Damien, and scattered. Malik and the others in the second car were all involved in a serious car wreck that night that resulted in all of their deaths. Damien made a full recovery, physically, but was never quite the same mentally. He would complain for several years after that he heard voices in his head and would sometimes see figures coming for him out of the shadows. He eventually killed himself in 2015. Peyton joined the seminary and is studying to become a priest. The rest of us are still slightly shell-shocked about that night and consider ourselves incredibly lucky to be alive.
There's always a reason to be afraid.